Howdy all, grab yourselves a beer, it is time for some Path of Exile discussion, and today we got the big one, the patch notes dropped for the Legion expansion that's coming out in a few days' time. Now, there's a whole lot in here. There's about 15,000 words here, and if I was to read everything out and give commentary on every line, that would probably result in you taking about 4 hours to hear this video. I don't have 4 hours to record it, you don't have 4 hours to listen to it, so I'm going to condense it. But that means that I'm going to be missing things as well. So definitely have a read through these yourself. I'm picking out things I think are important, but undoubtedly there's things I'm missing as well. So Section 1 details the Legion Challenge League. Watch the trailer for the Legion League, it covers it all. Section 2 covers major features. There's melee changes which I've discussed elsewhere. There's a whole bunch of new skill gems. Steel Skin, Dash, Bladestorm, Blood and Sand, Berserk, Frostblink, Precision, Flesh and Stone, Pride, Perforate, Chainhook, Pulverize, Rage, Impale, Shockwave, and Close Combat. I'm actually quite keen to see Impale in practice, and I'm keen to try Heavy Strike, Linked Pulverize, Ruthless, Impale, and Melee Physical Damage. But there's also plenty of other options available as well, so you know there's just so many build options that are coming out with these new gems. In addition to things with pretty much every melee skill in the game being reworked. There are 18 new sextant mods. This will be really interesting to see. I'm really keen to see what they've done with these because some of the sextant modifiers are bleh. The other thing that's interesting is that this is going to result in the most abusable of the sextant mods, which is enemies in strongboxes have plus 500% increased item quantity and are enraged. This is going to result in that mod being rarer. I'm not sure how that's going to affect farming. I think that some of the high investment mapping strategies I've occasionally used in the past will become less viable. I'm fine with that. Those strategies feel a bit broken anyway. And also other sextant mods, that other currently desirable sextant mods will also presumably be rarer as a result of these. We don't know very much about them, only 2 have been spoiled as far as I'm aware, but I think this will be an interesting thing that will change up the feel of endgame mapping. There's been a bunch of unique items that have been reworked as well, and there'll be some discussion of that. Now there's also been only 15 new keystones added to the passive tree with the new gems, so the new jewels. I made a video earlier that's developed a lot of discussion, a lot of disagreement, although I stand by the things I argued in it, talking about how I think these jewels are a very dangerous addition. However, knowing that there's only 15, which I'm assuming is going to be three different special keystones that are on the passive tree, and the seed will dictate which one is where, and possibly which ones of the 3 you have access to. Knowing that makes me a little bit less concerned about the system. I still think it's going to be a trade nightmare, I still think it's going to be a scammer's paradise, but I don't think they're as dangerous as they were as they sounded when they were first released. Anyway, no more on those. I'll reserve full judgment until we see them in practice. There's a section on minor content and features which, funnily enough, contains what I think is the most important change of all, which is the queuing of skills. This is going to be absolutely transformative for how melee combat is going to feel, especially if you are using skills that have some unique effect that you don't want to use often in combat, but you do want to use. A good example of that is Vigilant Strike, or another good example is Smite. These are skills that you probably don't have as your primary 6 link, but that you might just want to fire off once every now and again in combat to get their buffs that they have that are for a long duration that you'll then use to benefit your primary skills. So yeah, those skills will feel much better with queuing. The other thing that's significant here is these changes to the map stash tab, so added new functionality to the map stash tab, which displays which tiers and maps have Elder or Shaper influence or an Atlas objective. This is going to be phenomenal. I have a vague idea in my head of what this might look like, and I'm just thinking this is going to be absolutely fantastic for purposes of just fast and smooth mapping. There's also a number of graphical changes. These will probably break something and make 90% of people's games slightly better and 10% of people's life considerably worse. Those things will then get patched, and for most of the 10%, it'll end up being a net positive, but it'll be a while until that happens. Hopefully it doesn't break my system. Anyways, Section 4 covers the melee rebalance, and there's a whole lot of talk about things that I've discussed in other videos, so I won't go back into that. Section 5 deals with character balance, where there's talk about the changes to accuracy, and the accuracy formula, and how it interacts with evasion. There's also some interesting changes to stuns. I think this can be quite interesting. Melee physical attacks are better at stunning now. This is going to be something that I think will be... I think there is a bit more prospect for using stuns as a powerful mechanic in the game now. This, and in conjunction with the increased hit points on rare monsters and magic monsters we'll get to later, I think may make stunning, at the very least, a significant incidental bonus for being a physical damage character. I can also see this being fantastic for builds that use Starforge, and so yeah, that should be really good. There's also a number of other things there being changed. Now, skill reworks is the main section here. I'm not listing all of these, I'm just listing some of the ones that excite me. By all means, have a read through everything, your favourite melee skill, see what happened to it. Most of the melee skills are being changed, and a small number of non-melee skills as well. Cyclone looks powerful. Cyclone looks very powerful, and Vile Cyclone looks even better. I think these are huge buffs. Although the skill does lose some synergies, it gains some others as well. And yeah, I think this is Cyclone is going to be the default go-to skill. If you haven't decided what you're wanting to run, Cyclone seems to be something that will be beginner-friendly with considerable scaling. And I'll probably be putting together a build guide on a Slayer with Cyclone at some point. Immortal Call is a short duration guard that provides a very high percentage damage reduction that works against all sorts of incoming damage. It still feeds off endurance charges, but in a different way to how it used to. It's no longer about ultra short duration absolute immunity to physical damage. It's about a high percentage reduction to all elemental and physical damage. It's a different effect than it used to be, but I think it will be quite good. It's also very weak against chaos damage. Molten Shell. Molten Shell is something that is being transformed. Now, in some ways I'm sad about this because I like the live version of Molten Shell as well, and obviously the live version is going away. However, the new version is an intriguing skill. It's not something you can sustain up all the time, and it's quite complex, so let me explain how I believe it works. It provides a 75% effectiveness, basically bubble of temporary hit points that you get. The size of this bubble is equal to 20% of your armor, and it lasts for 3 seconds. So what this means is that if you've got 10,000 armor, this provides you with effectively 2,000 temporary hit points. These aren't quite consumed first. Incoming damage goes 75% against this bubble of extra health, and 25% comes through to your energy shield, or if your energy shield is depleted, through to your life. What this will do, if you cast it in response to a big hit that you're expecting to suffer, then it will enable you to, it'll take off most of the edge of that big hit and let you keep on fighting and rely upon your standard recovery rather than dropping perilously low on life from that big hit. You should save it for big hits as well. You shouldn't just use it, use it frivolously. If, however, you specialize in armor on your character, and you can get, say, 40,000 armor after you put up a granite flask of iron skin, then this is going to give you a massive boost of 8,000 temporary hit points. If you're copying a Shaper Slam, that's just fine. You can just stand there and tank that Shaper Slam, and then in addition, there will be a retaliatory explosion afterwards. Now, Molten Shell goes kaboom for a lot of damage when it expires. This damage, in the context of the Shaper example, if the Shaper slams you and consumes all 8,000 points of the shell for the 40,000 armor character, the Shaper is then going to take a retaliatory damage of 84,000. Now that's not a large amount of damage to the Shaper, that just tickles in, but it will kill most trash. And what I think will happen in practice is that you'll cast your Molten Shell when you're starting to get laid into by a bunch of monsters, then it will save your life, and then it'll explode and it'll kill all of the trash monsters that are attacking you, it'll kill all the magic monsters, it will kill all of the rares that are not specifically tanky, and then it will leave you against the tanky rares and all the bosses that remain. Key thing is that this can eat damage from all hits, not just physical, so it seems like it can eat damage from elemental and chaos things as well, and it does not have 100% uptime. It has a maximum of about 43% uptime, so 3 second duration, then when it explodes you've got 4 seconds until you can use it again. In any case, Molten Shell is an intriguing skill. I'm going to try and use it unless the way that items drop for me during the league pushes me away from armor focused gear. I'm not going to be specializing in armor, I'm just going to take what comes naturally on armor. If Molten Shell doesn't work out, well, there's always Immortal Call to work back to, which is something that, although it's different to what it used to be, it's something that should work in a fairly familiar way. Alright, so in terms of other skills that have been rebalanced, Ancestral Protector and War Chief got made slightly better numerically. These have already been popular builds. Ancestor Totem builds have been popular for a while. They're pretty safe boss killing builds. They don't do extraordinary damage, but they do enough. And the only reason I don't generally recommend them to players is they're pretty slow at clearing trash. However, the build functions, and it just got better. Now, there's a couple of skills that have been nerfed. Bane and Soul Rend have been nerfed moderately, but both should still be good. Herald of Agony has been nerfed hard. It is no longer a great skill, but I believe it will still be good. It has not been smashed by the nerf bat. On the other hand, Molten Strike, Winter Orb, and Stormbrand have been smashed. Or at least I believe Stormbrand has. I don't know quite enough about all of the intricacies of how the skill works, but I believe it's been absolutely smashed. I advise you not to play those skills in this league. We'll see how, it may be a while. I think they'll probably get reworked considerably more over time, but for the moment I think they're just looking really weak. Now, a number of skills, Blade Flurry and Cleave among them, have been changed to be less sensitive to weapon quality. They're better with bad gear, they're worse with extraordinarily good gear, and with average gear they'll be about the current performance. There's a number of skills like that. There's also a number of melee skills that have been unconditionally buffed. Among them, Dominating Blow, Dual Strike, Infernal Blow, Reave, all 3 of the retaliation skills, Sunder and Sweep. All of these have been unconditionally buffed. 2 that really excite me though, Frenzy and Glacial Hammer. Frenzy looks like a damage output machine for single target, but it's not really single target now because it has a small AoE. And Glacial Hammer, oh god, this looks like it hits hard. So Glacial Hammer and Smite have been made into very hard hitting skills that I think are probably the best ways in the game for a melee character to inflict elemental ailments. So this is Freeze and Shock. These do huge hits, and there may be ways to use this. At the moment I'm thinking Glacial Hammer is the sort of skill that will deal very good damage in a small area, but then used in conjunction with Herald of Ice, if you might be able to one-shot a rare monster with the Glacial Hammer, and then have that monster be frozen, and because you've killed a frozen monster, it explodes because of Herald of Ice, and that Herald of Ice explosion may kill everything else around. So that's something that is on my shortlist of things to experiment with in the league. Spectral Throw was made much better at all levels, but especially at low level where it was a terrible skill. And I think that's going to make it a lot smoother to play. It's also going to make the Scion less terrible to level, just through the very, very start of the game. Tectonic Slammers received some changes, and I'm not really sure. I need to see this in practice to be certain how good it is now. My gut says it's probably slightly worse than it was, but I may very well be wrong on that front. Jumping down into the Vaal skills, I've already mentioned Vaal Cyclone looks amazing. Vaal Double Strike has been nerfed hard, but should still be a good skill because it was just so good beforehand that even with a big nerf it can still remain good. Vile Glacial Hammer, stop vendoring this as soon as you see it. I think it may actually be quite good. Vile Molten Shell is Molten Shell on steroids. Even with only 12,000 armor now, you can face tank huge slams. This should be used in conjunction with the Granite Flask if you decide to use it, and I think this has some potential. In any case, the mechanics are very similar to those of Molten Shell, just basically with much higher numbers. One thing I'm curious to know is how Vile Molten Shell interacts with the craftable bench mod that gives approximately 3,500 extra armor during soul gain prevention. I'm not certain, I believe you can get that on several different pieces of gear. Now, if this works the way that I think it does, if that ends up contributing to the size of the ablative bubble, that protective bubble that Vile Molten Shell gives you, then it will make Vile Molten Shell an absolutely incredible panic button for certain types of content where you take very big hits but that you can predict them. Support gem reworks. Multi-strike looks fantastic. Lesser poison looks like a real sleeper gem. I haven't seen anyone else talking about this, but the numbers on it look like they're right now. They look like they're high enough to use this gem as a hybrid of poison support and added chaos support that may well end up being better than the sum of its parts. Ruthless support has just got a numerical advantage on it that makes it better than it was, and it was never a terrible support gem. Again, really good in conjunction with dealing. Really good in conjunction with any of the ailments that you want to inflict. And when I say ailments, I'm including stuns in this, even though stuns technically aren't an ailment. Any secondary effects of weapon attacks on two-handed weapons. If you want to stun, if you want to freeze, if you want to shock, Ruthless support is your friend. Okay, passive tree balance. First up, rest in peace, Occultist. I had a lot of fun playing you. I know a lot of other people did. The Occultist has gone from a curses... basically from an ascendancy that had an energy shield specialty with curses as a secondary defense or cold and chaos damage as an offensive tree. It has basically entirely lost the energy shield aspect of the build. I'm going to go as far as to say that Occultist now has only the curses as its defensive layers. And it's gone from being the best defensive ascendancy in the game to being a middle tier defensive ascendancy, where if it elects to use two blasphemy curses that debilitate enemies like temporal chains or enfeeble, it ends up being a reasonable defensive choice. But I think it's going to be, in terms of its defensive abilities, think more as defensive as a champion, whereas previously it was tankier than a Juggernaut. It will now be considerably lower than a Juggernaut and more in line with a champion. So yeah, Occultist will no longer be one of the most played ascendancies. It might still be played, but it's not going to be everywhere like it has been the last couple of leagues. I'm curious to see if Overcharge has been put into a spot that you can intuitive leap to it, but that's going to require a bit more investigation. And really, there's a lot more investigation of the passive tree that needs to be done before I can say much further here. There's a lot of new options here. Too much for me to explore right now. This is the sort of thing that will have to come up when I get around to designing some of the starter builds that I've got in mind. Ascendancy balance I've covered in separate videos. I'm not going to reinvent the wheel here, other than to say Trickster has been slapped with the nerf bat, but not smashed in the face with it, and should still be an excellent ascendancy. Guardians had a tiny little slap that won't ruin anything. Elementalist has had a significant but not crippling nerf. And Deadeye's changes here, 50% more accuracy rating instead of double, is just in line with the total transformation of how accuracy scales. I don't think that's intended as a nerf so much as a retain the 3.6 functionality roughly equivalently. Yeah, there's a number of changes to the Scion Ascendant, but they're pretty minor. They're all around the edges. Item balance. Horizon Orbs are now normal drops, and this is going to be fantastic for early Atlas exploration. Even if they're pretty rare, like even if they're set up to be Regal Orb rarity, and Regal Orbs are something that people underestimate how rare they are. You only get about 10 of them a drop per Exalt that drops. So Regal Orbs are pretty rare. But there's enough of them in the economy because they're not used in massive quantities anywhere, that they end up being pretty cheap. If Horizon Orbs are the same rarity as Regals, then you can rely upon having a good deal of them for fleshing out your Atlas. It should just make the experience of completing white maps for veteran players much more enjoyable than it is now, and much quicker than it is now. For players that aren't veterans, I think Horizon Orbs will just be a bit of a curiosity that you'll trade off, mostly. But for veterans, it will really turbocharge you through the first few tiers of the Atlas, and getting you back up to the parts that you find engaging. Headhunter has been made rarer, as is Solstice Vigil, as is Eternity Shroud. And this is this cryptic line here, which is explained more elsewhere. And that's going to be interesting. I'm still going to start a Headhunter-oriented Atlas, and I'll just change it if it feels like I'm getting less expected value per map than I was in the past. Abyss Jewels have nearly been deleted from the game, and I won't miss them. They were OP. They shouldn't have been made core. They should have been nerfed at the time Abyss League ended. They weren't, but now they're getting the nerf they should have had back then. There's a whole bunch of unique item changes, and some of these look really strong. Particularly the one that excites me the most is Rebuke of the Vaal. This is a build enabling weapon. If I was a better person, I'd feel terrible about the person that had a perfectly divined one in standard. That is now going to be less than minimum roll on the new ones. This item is just going to be absurd now, and it's going to be, yeah, I don't think there's anything more to say. It's just the numbers on this are amazing. You're going to want to dual wield them. There's going to be an entire new way of scaling damage with this. There's going to need to be a lot of theory crafting about this item. Expect this is an item you are probably used to not even picking up. Get used to picking it up, and make sure that you set your loot filter to play the Exalt sound when this item drops. Now, in terms of other changes, monster changes. 50% more life for magic monsters at level 1, up to 75% more at endgame. This is going to be a great change. Magic monsters have always had rewards that would just outstrip the danger that they posed. And, basically, if you had the choice between fighting 2 rare monsters, 5 magic monsters, or 10 white monsters, the 5 magic monsters would be the easiest to kill, and they would have of the 3 different packs, and they would have the best loot, and they would give you the most XP. Now they're being changed to the point that I think the 10 white monsters will be the easiest and will have the least rewards. Then in the middle will probably be the rare monsters, and the magic monsters will be the harder pack. In any case, these changes I think will make the game more fun. They will make leveling feel different, because a lot of the time players run from one magic pack, then run to the next magic pack, and just only kill incidentally on the way there. Now you're going to want to, you're not going to want to bias as heavily towards only killing magic monsters as you'd been incentivized to do in the past, because magic monsters are going to take longer. The time taken to kill them will be brought to be more commensurate with the rewards that they offer. Rare monsters get a smaller boost early and a much bigger boost late game, and I think that's a really good way of doing it. They also get 4% more experience. This undoubtedly is because players already often skip rare monsters, and now rare monsters are going to be even tankier, so without that change they wouldn't have been worth killing. They'll be worth killing now. At least most of them will be. And you'll notice player skill will be knowing which ones to say, yep, you know what, stuff it, I'm running away from this one. This is also going to double the hit points of some of the tankiest monsters in the game. 4-5 essence monsters, multiply possessed monsters, red beasts. All of these are going to get their hit points doubled. That's going to be interesting. Tormented spirits have been changed. Yeah, I'll believe it when I see it. Some monsters can block. This will de facto double their hit points because when they block, they take half damage. And yeah, Rogue Exile changes, that's pretty minor. The only other changes that I've got to mention here, there's the Incursion changes. 12 Incursions will feel better than 11. Betrayal changes. There's been some bug fixes to both Betrayal and the Mines that should improve things. And then there's been a couple of other little changes in the map changes section. Firstly, Coward's Trial has been changed, and we don't know anything about it. This implies that Coward's Trial might be a tier 1 rarity map, if you're lucky enough to get one. We'll have to see what it is when we get into it. The other thing though that's changing, and this is something that I was not expecting, is this line here. This is going to transform endgame play. You no longer have to pay Val Orbs equal to the cost in Chaos Orbs to apply Zana's crafting modifiers to corrupted maps. This is going to be transformative. This means that you are going to probably want to, if you're running tier 15 maps, you're going to want to Val every map that you run. You're then going to run your tier 15 versions, the ones that stay tier 15, using any Zana mods that you feel are applicable. And you will also get Val temples, you will get Guardian maps from them. So this is basically a huge buff to Val Orbs on maps. And I think Val Orbs already were the thing that were mostly used on maps, at least by experienced players. And I think this is going to make Valing maps much more common than it has been, much more lucrative than it has been. 8 mod maps will be more common than they've been in the past because more players will be rolling them up, and there'll be more trade in them because people will corrupt a map and wind up with mods they can't do. I've already covered the Zana League mods. That was a separate video I put up yesterday, but that's going to be the end of things that I want to comment on these changes. I'm excited here. I'm really excited for some of the new melee skill changes, and I've got a couple of ideas in mind. The first thing that I want to consider is running Glacial Hammer with multi-strike, pulverize, weapon elemental damage, and ruthless, and supported by the auras Hatred and Herald of Ice, in order to, well, Herald of Ice not being an aura, in order to freeze monsters and then set off those satisfying chain reaction explosions with Herald of Ice. The other thing I'm keen to try is Heavy Strike with Pulverize, Ruthless, Impale, and Melee physical damage for massive, massive damage and absurd stuns. So yeah, there's a lot of things that allow the making of new builds here, and in general, I'm hyped to see what people can build out of the new content. I'm not going to miss Winter Orb, and I'm not going to miss Stormbrand as omnipresent skills that are everywhere. I think it's time for them to take a little bit of a back seat. The first nerf they got wasn't enough to kill them. This hopefully will just put them in a position where for a few leagues we don't see them very much. People that really love them might still play them anyway as a challenge, but I think they'll be probably about as popular as skills like Viper Strike were this league. Anyways, leave your comments below, and I will try to get out 3 to 5 build guides, at least 2 of which are suitable for newer players and the rest are more veteran oriented, by the time the league launches.